Hi, welcome back to Stand Up and Redo. I am so happy that you have joined my podcast again. This one's going to be a little bit lighter, even though the title is Physical Trauma. This particular episode I'm kind of excited to talk about because it's going to have some fun stories in it. I'm a little nervous if my mom hears it because I don't want her to hear maybe things that I did when I was younger that I wouldn't want her to know about. But I think it's going to be entertaining. This part one is going to be about my own physical trauma, and that's why I can easily state that it's going to be a little lighter. But the next one, part two, might be a little heavier because I'm going to interview my uncle, and I can't wait to hear his story. First, he's just an amazing man anyway. I absolutely love him. And I can't wait not to necessarily hear all the details of his physical trauma, but I do want to hear it. I do. And I'm excited to interview him and for you to hear that in part two. But let's not talk about part two when we're in part one. Part one, I'm going to start off by just telling you it's about basically a driving and car accident, actually 2 car accidents, actually 3 car accidents. But I'm going to start by, first, I will make a statement here. I am a good driver. There you go. I drive a lot. And all the car accidents weren't me driving. But I'm going to tell you about the big car accident at the end. But I want to start off by telling you some stories. When I was a kid, I had an uncle, and he had a KX80. So it's a motorcycle. So my first ever driving experience was probably driving that motorcycle, now that I think about it, because my aunt and uncle, Don and Tuesday, had quads. We used to call them quads. I don't think they call them that anymore. I think they're four-wheelers. I don't even know what they are, ATVs. But I used to ride their quads around when I was like maybe a little bit older, maybe 13, 14. I can't remember the age I was then. But before that, my very first ever driving experience, other than the go-karts on the Wildwood Boardwalk, was with this motorcycle. It was like this green KX80, and I remember he used to drive it around in these cornfields out in the back behind his house. And I can guarantee my mom had no idea that when I was I feel like I was 11 or 12, that he let me drive his KX80, which was so fun. I do remember really not having any control of it when I first took off. I remember just jutting forward, swerving all over, and thank God I didn't hit anything, because I did feel like I truly didn't have any control of this motorcycle at first. And then once I was on it and figured out how to shift the gears and, accelerate and turn, I was able to drive that KX80. But that was probably my first driving anything experience. Then I remember when my cousin Elle they lived on the little property. It was a few acres, and the horses that I think I did share my horseback riding story with you earlier on in another podcast. But we used to take the hay back to the barn in this little, it was like an orangey yellow station wagon car. It was just like a small station wagon, and it looked like it was probably a station wagon from this was in the early 80s. So it was like a station wagon that looked almost like a gremlin car, but it wasn't a gremlin, I know that. It was some other kind of car, and it had a roof rack on top. And this is the story I really don't want my mom to hear, but this is what we did. This was really bad. And I can't wait to talk to my cousin Elle after this about what her memory of this was. But we were so bad. Like I said, we were rough and tumble girls. We weren't hair and makeup girls, I can tell you that much. It was a struggle for me to put hair and to do my hair and do my makeup in the morning, especially when I was in high school. But I remember we were like, I guess we were 15 maybe. We didn't have our driver's license, but we were getting close to being able to get our driver's license. We would take that orange station wagon out to the field, and one of us would climb up on top and hold on to the roof rack, and the other one would do figure eights driving the car around in the field, trying to whip the other person on top off. So we would take turns driving and take turns holding onto the roof rack. It's insane. I can't even believe that we did that. We were crazy, and I hope that you don't think that I am crazy, because I'm actually an extremely responsible person. But those were my driving experiences before getting my driver's license. Well, when I was the day I turned 17, I think it was on my birthday, I went and took my driver's test because I wanted to drive so bad. I didn't want to delay it. I was ready to go, and I actually had saved up money. My dad, like I said, we didn't have a lot of money when I was a kid, so my dad had a Boss 302 Mustang, and I purchased it from him for I think it was $600 or $700, I remember. It was it wasn't a lot, but I remember I saved up summertime work money. I used to save up a lot of money in the summertime, I would just keep throwing all of the money that I made at my summer jobs in a shoebox in my closet. Sometimes I did put it in the bank, but I remember just having thousands and thousands of dollars in my closet. I was trying to save. Actually, I was saving my money for college, and that's a sidebar story. I ended up paying for my whole entire college, besides getting a little bit of financial aid and scholarships. I ended up paying for all of my college by myself, and I'm so proud of that. It's one thing I will be forever proud of. But that's way sidebar story. I bought this Boss 302 Mustang, and it was beautiful. It had it was a almond color on the outside, and the inside had this brown leather interior, and it just was a beautiful Mustang. It was so pretty, and it had the fastback, and it just was really sharp, and it was so powerful. And when I drove it, I just loved that it had a big steering wheel. I don't feel like they make steering wheels like they used to. Now they're these little tiny steering wheels. And whenever I get into a rental car, sometimes if the steering wheel is too little, I just get out and go get a different one, because there's just certain things about a car is that for me, I don't know, the steering wheel is important. It sounds really silly, doesn't it? But it's true. I had this big steering wheel, and the car I had actually after I bought the car, I immediately drove to, I think it was a town in Delhaven or Delsea in New Jersey, to meet this man who was going to paint it. And I found out he was going to paint my car for I think it was under $500. So I had made an appointment with him to paint the car in I think in 2 weeks. The car was in great shape. It didn't have any rust or anything on it. It was just a beautiful, beautiful car. So I remember, okay, here you are. Here's this girl, right? There's a road near where I lived. It was Weeks Landing Road. Had this now there's houses on it, beautiful homes now. But back then, the Weeks Landing Road turned into a dirt road straight back through fields. And then if you went straight back through the fields, you would end up at the marshes back there where we called it Weeks Landing. Hello, landing. There was a landing for boats to go into the marshes and the sounds or whatever, however you want to call them, and go crabbing or fishing or whatever you wanted to do back there. But it was like a boat launch area where you could launch your boat. But to get there was just this long, long open dirt road with fields on the sides, and some of them were being farmed and some weren't. One of the fields, right before you got to the landing, when my cousin and I did a lot with my cousins. You hear me say my cousin, because I have 50 first cousins. But one of my cousins and I, when we were like 11 or 12, we would walk down to Weeks Landing, all the way down to the end, the very last field. There were banner boys who were probably like teenagers. The banner planes, the planes that when you're at the beach, you see the plane go over the ocean with the big banner on the back. Well, we would go sit and watch the banner planes dive down and pick up the banners, because they'd lay the banners out on the field and the plane would scoop down, and then the banner boys, we called them the banner boys. I don't know what they called themselves, but we were only like 12 years old when we would go out, probably forever how long. They were out there for a few years doing that in that field. We would just sit there on the edge of the field and watch the banner boys, because we thought they were so cute. Oh my gosh, then they were all like probably 17, 18-year-old boys who worked the field and put the banners on the plane. So we would be like, oh my gosh, he's so cute. So we were like, 12-year-old girls. Anyway, that road was a dirt road. And I still remember, it was like I was getting ready. It was like I was going to race. I remember just stopping the Mustang at the very end of where it's the dirt, where the pavement stopped from the actual road of Weeks Landing Road that turned into the dirt. And I remember stopping there and nobody was around, and just looking around to make sure nobody was around, because I didn't want to get in trouble. And just taking that Mustang and flooring it and just flying on that road as fast as I could, and just pumping that gas pedal and just getting it as fast as I could possibly get that car to go. And that was just extreme joy, extreme fun for me. And I didn't do that for long, and I'll tell you why. Because I only had the car for 1 month. And this is what happened. Came home from school, I'm 17 years old. I was into sports. So I had winter track at that time. It was March. We had switched over from spring track to winter track. And I was really great shape, because I used to run the 1 mile, the 1600, and the 2 mile in the races. I was the distance runner. So, I was in really good shape. I loved to run, so sometimes even I would run after track practice. That's kind of sick, right? Yeah, that's really sick. But running, I said, was my stress relief. So, track practice was track practice, but doing just a run out in the woods or down along the path that was near my parents' house was my stress relief. But I had rushed home. It was late. I got home late from track practice. We would go to youth group at this place called Grace Gospel Chapel. So I was still going to youth group on like Wednesday nights. Really liked youth group. I really like church. I felt like youth group, we would sit, we'd read the Bible, we'd talk about what we learned in the Bible, and I really enjoyed that. So youth group started at 7, and I think I got home. I can still remember. It's so weird. Like I said, when something happens to you, it like imprints that day in your whole life. So I remember the feelings that I had. This is such a weird thing. I can still go back in time, and I can still remember standing at the table and trying to lay out my math homework and look at what I had to do that night. Meanwhile, my dad was getting me food, and I still remember it all. He's like, you need to eat something. My dad was really a feeder. My dad's love language was probably feeding you. And he was standing there like, you need to eat something before you go to youth group. You got to eat. And I'm like, okay. And I really didn't have time to eat. I was actually starving though. And he's like, we have, I remember we were arguing a little bit because he had stuffed peppers he cooked, or there were stuffed peppers, and I didn't like stuffed peppers really back then. Now I love them. But back then, and actually I couldn't, I'll explain why I couldn't eat them for a long time after this, but I remember him saying, I have some stuffed peppers here for you. That's how he would talk. He'd be like, just, yeah, you're going to eat some of these stuffed peppers. I'm like, okay. So I remember I was standing there, and I can still remember I was all sweaty, and usually I like to shower, and I didn't have time to shower and do my hair, and I usually would try to, like, shower and at least look neat and presentable for youth group. I would put on like a prettier shirt, maybe just try to look a little more together, because when you're 17 too, you're always thinking, what do people, we want to look kind of good for some, if there were guys there, you're always thinking, I want to look pretty. But anyway, either way, I remember I had these jeans on, and I had like one of those funky cut off sweatshirts where you cut the neck out a little bit, and it was cut off for comfort. It actually wasn't like the Flashdance sweatshirt style as much as I hated necks that were tight. So I still had my outfit. I remember I still had the t-shirt that I had practiced in, and it was gross, and thinking how it was so sweaty, but I didn't have time to run upstairs because all of a sudden my mom and dad are telling me that I had to pick up my cousin. I was going to pick up my cousins, a lot of my cousins. I had to take my cousin T, my cousin E, my little brother Jay. I had a whole car full of people in my Mustang that I was going to be driving to youth group, and I had to do. And I remember looking up, I was standing there getting ready to sit down and eat the stuffed peppers, looking up at the clock. It was like 20 to 7. Youth group started at 7, and I had to do all this picking up of people to get to youth group at 7. I didn't want to be late. It's only like an hour and a half. It's not even long. So I was shoving this giant stuffed pepper. I must have ate it in like 5 minutes. I bet the thing was almost whole in my belly. Got up, grabbed the keys to the car, said, all right, I'm going. Meanwhile, the phone rings or whatever. My uncle calls and says, hey, I have to get on the ferry. Can you drop us off at the ferry, him and his son? And we have to go do a job. And I'm like, oh, the ferry. The ferry was going to throw a whole wrench into everything because it was the opposite direction of youth group. It's not, you have to get into the ferry, drop the person off, get out of there, the terminal, and then drive to youth group. So I was like, yeah, tell them to just jump right in the car when I pull up, right? And, so I am listening, run out, out to the car, jump in the car, and go. I don't think I was speeding. I was actually very cautious on the roads when I drove. I wasn't a crazy driver. Like, I know I told you about how I like to go fast, how I did figure eights, trying to whip my cousin off the top of the car. I know I told you about all that stuff, but I actually was a responsible driver when I was on the road. I mean, it was all about being safe and just getting my driver's license. Gosh, I never wanted to get pulled over by a cop. Which is probably why I went back on the dirt road to do the pumping the gas and pushing on the gas and flying in my car. But either way, within 10 minutes, had a car so stuffed full of people. And this is advice I'll give you. I'm going to do a stand-up and redo in the middle of my show, which usually I wait till the very end. But if you have a young teenager, for a while, at least for the first maybe 2 or 3 or 4 months, or maybe even a little longer, don't shove their car so full of people. It's a huge distraction, and I can tell you I was a little overwhelmed with all the people in the car, and I'm not blaming that on why this car accident happened. Not even a little bit. It happened. It was an accident, right? It happened. And I can't beat myself up about this part of it. Although it was a life-changing moment. I'll say that much, for sure. Because what happened next, we're all driving, we're all laughing, there's a whole bunch of chaotic stuff going on. my little brother is like, he's like, his head is popping in and out between the two bucket seats from the back, and he's like, hey pet, hey pet, hey pet. I can still hear him doing it because he's very hyperactive, and he's like all excited because there's all these people in the car, and he's squished in the middle because he went to youth group with me. I don't know if he was going to youth group or what. I don't know what he did because he was 3 years younger than me, so he was probably old enough now to be in youth group. You figure if I was 17, he was 14. So yeah, he was going to youth group with me. That's why he was there, I guess, because I definitely remember him in the car. So we're driving, and all of a sudden, there's a fork in the road. So what I remember is looking around the corner to the right, because the fork if you went to the right, you went around a corner and there were trees there. So I remember looking and not seeing a car. I'll just say that. I remember looking and not seeing a car to the right and pulling across, but then at the same time hearing my Uncle Ed yell, "Do you see that car?" And it was like almost in a panic. I said yes, because at the same time, at the other part of the fork, there was a car coming towards me. So I thought he meant, "Do you see that car?" And I looked up and slowed down a little bit in a panic. And I almost feel like maybe that slowing down, I almost feel like whatever happened, I can tell you honestly, all I remember is him yelling, "Do you see that car?" And me saying yes and looking ahead at a car. And then I don't remember after that. I don't remember the impact. I remember, this is what I remember first after the accident, because I found out my head went through the windshield. So my head went through the windshield, and I then didn't go all the way out of the car, obviously, because my head went through, I guess, and then came back. I came back. But I was knocked unconscious, and I stayed unconscious for quite some time. I do remember being in the ambulance, though. I remember briefly this young blonde guy, because I remember his hair was like bleached, this beautiful blonde hair. I just remember looking at his hair, but he was like 2 inches from my face, and he was yelling at me and talking to me. And I just remember seeing, I guess it was the ambulance and all the lights in the ambulance for 1 second. That's it. For some reason, I have this memory of that. But then I didn't wake up again till I was in the emergency room later. And then the next thing I remember, this is really gross. I was laying flat. I was laying flat in a gurney in the ER. And I remember opening my eyes. And I could visualize, I guess my head was far enough back that I could see the suction canister. And all I remember is I remember waking up feeling nauseous, first off. I think I woke up because I felt like I was going to vomit. But when I felt this nauseous feeling, I looked up, and as I feel like I'm going to vomit, all I can see is stuffed peppers going in the canister. There's a canister full of ranky, nasty, vomitous stuffed peppers. Oh, I can still see it. It was so gross. So I could not eat a stuffed pepper for years. And actually it took me a while to even smell a pepper after that. Because now I love peppers. Oh my gosh. I could mass consume them raw. I love them every which way. I love green peppers, red peppers, yellow peppers. I love them. But back then when I saw that canister full of stuffed peppers, oh my gosh, that was just gaggy. And then I just remember a lot of chaos around me. I remember hearing beeping, noises, people talking, people being talking about me being awake, doing she's awake, blah, blah, blah. I remember a lot of chaos around me and just noises. Then it calmed down, and you're kind of just laying there, and you don't know what the heck is going on, and you're scared to death. And I don't remember anybody being with me at that time. I don't remember my mom being back there, my dad anywhere. I guess I was there at that point alone for a while. Maybe they weren't allowed back there at that time because it was such a critical moment did feel like they were all over me a little bit. I mean, I had at this point I didn't realize I had a huge gash in my forehead. And blood was everywhere. Blood, my whole head was covered in blood. My hair was encrusted in blood. And I know it was because the next day it was encrusted. My hair was like crunchy with blood in it the next day, like the whole thing. It was just gross. Because they don't wash your hair right away, you know. They don't even think about that. That's the last thing they're thinking about. But my head was covered with it. And so I was probably a scary sight for a lot of people. But me waking up, I don't realize it. I'm just, okay, things are happening around me. Didn't even feel the gash on my head at the time. I guess I didn't even feel that. Maybe they had it, I'm sure they had it covered up or something, I don't know. But all I know is I remember them discussing they were going to take me to get a CAT scan. And they were bringing over another bed to transport me in. And they were going to move me from this bed that I was in to some kind of a stretcher to take me to this CAT scan. So as they were moving me, if you've ever broken a bone, that was my first time I ever had anything broken in my body. And I didn't know it was broken until they moved me. And when they moved me, and I'm not a screamer. I'm not actually a screamer. I don't even think I screamed when I had my children. Like, I don't scream, really. Well, I mean, if you jump up and go, boo, I'm going to scream. If you terrify me, I'm going to scream. But when I'm not like a big, like, wailer or crier, you know, a big, like, I don't cry much, I guess. I mean, I cry, but I don't cry loud. So, okay, what's the point? Let me just move on. The point is, when they moved me, I screamed so loud. I think I frightened everyone. Everyone was like, what? What's wrong? I had a broken hip, and it hurt so bad when they tried to move me. I will never forget that pain. I can still feel it when I describe it to you. It hurt so bad. So they got me into this gurney. So I guess, you know, they weren't just going to be doing a CAT scan of my head. They were going to be checking out my hip too. So wherever they took me next, I don't remember after that. I don't remember going in the CAT scan. I just remember that pain of my hip. And then assessment on, you know, they had to figure out what was wrong with me there. So the next thing I remember in the hospital is my one Aunt T, I'm trying not to say full names, but everybody who knows my Aunt T is going to know. My Aunt T came with my mom for some reason. She was there, and then my mom was there, and my dad, I'm sure, was there somewhere. My dad is just this stoic. I actually want to think about my dad being there watching me, and how scared he probably was. And I feel like I'm going to cry for my dad. That's not silly right now. This is the trauma that's coming back. I want to cry thinking about my parents seeing me like this. Because I can only imagine how terrified they were at this time. But either way, what I remember next is they were calling in. The ER doctor comes in, and he was going to stitch me up. And my Aunt T goes, whoa, no. And my mom didn't know. My mom didn't know any better because she wasn't in healthcare. My Aunt T was a nurse. And she's like, no, we need her. She's not going to have the ER stitch her face up. I mean, it was a huge gash. It wasn't even like a clean cut. It was like shredded. My forehead, if I say shredded, it was shredded. Like the skin it was a huge gap in my forehead with glass just smushed in under my skin. It was like crunchy glass. It was all up in my forehead. So she said, no, we're going to have a plastic surgeon. Well, then the plastic surgeon comes. We had to wait a little longer for him to come. So they got a plastic surgeon. And I remember this was back when AIDS was a new thing in the 80s. AIDS, everyone was just finding out about AIDS, what AIDS was. You know, AIDS was on high alert. And this is another thing that fascinates me as a nurse. I mean, always an old-time nursing. But people didn't wear gloves back in, I guess, before maybe AIDS. I'm sure AIDS brought on a new PPE process in the hospital. But back then, a lot of people didn't wear gloves, believe it or not. So he comes up, he's a plastic surgeon, and his practice, when he, I guess, would stitch people up, was that he didn't wear gloves. And he was a young plastic surgeon. Now, when I say young, I mean he was, I don't remember his name. He wasn't old enough to be someone that would die. And my aunt did another thing that she was going to stitch me up without gloves on. And my aunt said, no, you have to wear gloves when you stitch her up. And I just thought that was interesting. She was really gutsy and bold, but she was my advocate. And, that's a whole nother podcast. I'm going to do one on advocacy in healthcare, because I think about her, two really crucial things she did for me. And my scar is actually on my forehead. If you look, you can tell. Like, if you really look at me, you can see the scar on my forehead. But, I mean, he did a beautiful job. I can't describe the wound that was there and how it looked, and to think that the scar that I have now is so minute. She told him to wear gloves, and the interesting thing was I don't want to say, but I mean, I know he did end up passing away, and I think he actually did, and I don't know, so I have to be careful, because first off, I don't think anybody's going to know, although they might know because Cape May is small. So anyway, he ended up passing away at a young age, and I don't know why he did. I don't know what the reason was, but I just did feel better that I just remember being proud of her that she told me I had to wear gloves. I just remember being like, wow, she really cares about me, because she didn't want me to get anything from him, She wanted me to be protected from him, not just him. She wasn't thinking, maybe she was thinking about him touching my blood. I mean, I don't know. But he was going to go in there, no gloves, and stitch me up and she asked him to wear gloves. And he did. He did put gloves on. But, so that's the next thing I remember after trying to be moved. And then the next thing I remember is they put me in traction. I remember the doctors discussing my broken hip and discussing how they were going to handle it. And the broken hip wasn't a fracture. It was a true break. Like, it was clean through the bone. When I say clean through the bone, I mean it was just, my hip was in two parts. It was truly broken into two parts. And the reason it was like that, this is an interesting thing, they didn't know I had a broken knee too. My patella, the same thing, was broken clean in half, like clean. I mean, it was almost like you did a karate chop of my patella, and it just went boop, two pieces, just like when you chop a karate board in half, it was just like boop, broken half. So what had happened was my giant steering wheel that I loved, I'm bragging about I have to have a big steering wheel. Well, it was so low, the way that the wheel was, that my knee was level with the wheel. And what happened was, when the impact happened, my knee got karate chopped. It reverberated through my femur right to my hip, and then broke my hip in half, and my femur was fine. It's just no breaks at all, which is a good, I think, maybe because, and this might sound cocky to say this, but my legs were so strong, like the muscle, and that doctor did later say the strength in my legs maybe did help with giving it like that clean break, which was the best break it could be. It was better than a fracture, it was better, the kind of break that it was, because I was so young, I was 17, was going to heal. But they had to have me in traction for like 12 weeks. Oh my gosh. So they put weights on the bed, and they had like this they set up this apparatus, and there's like, you have a certain amount of pounds of weights that's just pulling your bones to keep everything aligned straight. And you can never take the traction off. The traction stays on. It stays on all the time. And I couldn't even ever, like even doing a bed bath, going to the bathroom, I had to use a fracture pan. I couldn't even get out of, I never got out of the bed. I was in the bed. So of course they're worried about like bed sores or like a DVT in my leg. So these were all the things I was learning about as a 17-year-old girl. Like, of course I'm thinking a bed sore. What's a bed sore? They're like talking about bed sores. They're talking about, I was, when they told me about a DVT in my leg, that scared the crap out of me. So I did not want to get a DVT. So I was so anal. Sorry, anal might not be a nice description. I don't know why I use that term sometimes. I was so terrified that I would actually do these isometric exercises every day while I was in bed and try to wiggle my muscles all around, because I thought, I don't want a DVT. I don't want a DVT. I did not want to die. I did not want to die. I just did not want to throw a clot. I didn't, that was my fear. Of course, I probably, once I heard about it, my mom's probably more terrified than me because she's terrified of anything happening. So she probably scared me to death, describing all the ways I could die laying in bed. But anyway, so I ended up being in traction in the hospital. I feel like I was in the hospital for at least, I feel like I was in there for like 4 weeks. It felt like forever in the hospital. Oh my gosh. And I was in the pediatric department. So I always had a little kid in my room, and these were the times when you did not have your own room, you shared a room. So I always had a little kid in my room, which I didn't mind the kid. I never minded having a child in my room. Kids were kind of entertaining, and it was fun to talk to them or tease them or play with them from afar or whatever, read to them, make faces at them, just whatever I could do when there was a kid in the room. It was the parents that were annoying. The parents would come visit their kids, and that when you're stuffed in a little tiny room, and then you'd have weird people come visit the kids, like Uncle Joe or Uncle Tom, and they'd be visiting, and they'd be staring at me the whole time they're visiting, their niece or nephew. Or I just remember other people that I didn't know coming into my private space and just like either having trying to have a conversation with me, having a nice conversation with me sometimes, but not feeling like I wanted to see these strangers, just literally like more enthralled with me being there than their little kid. And just that was annoying for me, overwhelming as a teenager. But I did have a lot of my friends come at night, which was really fun to watch like TV shows or just hang out with me. So that was fun. I'd have a friend or two sometimes just hang out. My boyfriend at the time, who ended up being my husband, was wonderful. He'd come I think he came almost every day. And he had just gotten his driver's license too, so he had a little pickup truck, and he'd drive it to visit me. Although it made my heart break, because a couple times he brought another girl with him, and then he'd be like, yeah, I'm just giving this girl a ride to a party, and I would be like, either way, the trials and tribulations of teenage love, whatever, but either way, I do remember that time being life-changing. And the physical trauma, first off, I was diehard athlete. I loved working out. I loved working out when I wasn't in sports, and then I was in the middle of being in winter track, and I was so excited about winter track that year, and of course didn't get to do it. But either way, I remember these things about that time. First off, I got straight A's. I remember I wasn't an A student. I just did homework and got really good grades, so my GPA went up. That was a good thing. Okay, let's talk about the good things. Let's talk about the good things. That was a good thing. The other thing was you really find yourself, I remember I knew my course in life was to be a servant to other people. And this sounds really weird. I knew when I was a young girl, I wanted to help other people. someday, whatever it was, I wanted to be a person that was an advocate for people who were suffering, especially children. And that was neat to be in the peds department. And I remember seeing the little child that didn't have the visitors, the one that was maybe looked a little disheveled or less kept, and knowing that they didn't have good parents. I don't want to say good parents who weren't as attentive to them. And you could just tell by the way they acted. And I just always thought I wanted to be a social worker. I actually knew, if you asked me before that car accident, what are you going to do when you grow up? I wanted to be a social worker. I wanted to be a social worker because I felt like my calling was to help other people. I didn't know how I was, I wanted to help. I wanted to really help women and children or poor people, people that didn't have a lot of money, even men too, not just women, families that didn't have a lot of money. I wanted to help those people. I wanted to be an advocate for them. Didn't know how, so I just knew social working was a job that helped people. And that was going to be my course of action until this accident. So I remember every nurse in that hospital that took care of me, everyone. I remember the night shift nurses, the day shift nurses. Yeah, I remember them. I remember their names. I remember them coming. And I will never forget watching the nurses do the rounds with the doctors and hearing them discuss the patient with the doctor and the doctor writing notes and the nurse saying, blah, 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 blah. This is what we need. This is what they have. This is what I expect you to do for them. And the doctor being like, thanks, nurse, whatever, okay. And I will never forget them, even the nurses doing the assessment, coming in every morning and night, listening to my heart and lungs, and finding things wrong with me. As a matter of fact, the one nurse, everyone didn't measure my ankles, but this one nurse, every day, a part of her practice was in the morning, she would measure my ankles, and she would measure my legs at different points. She actually did the best assessment. I'll never forget, her assessment was the most thorough. Not that the other nurses weren't great, they were wonderful, but she did every day a full head-to-toe assessment on me. Not just a centered assessment on my hip, like as a nurse you learn, you do a full assessment on all your patients, especially when they're admitted, and then you do an assessment daily on them, a full assessment, and you learn about focused assessments and coming in if you only have a couple minutes to do the focused assessment on the area or the main thing that's wrong with the person. But if you can't get to do the full assessment at that moment, then come back in sometime during the day you're going to do a full assessment on your patient. But she did this amazing full assessment, much more involved than the other nurses did. And she would measure with a measuring tape my legs. And of course, she was probably looking for a DVT. But I remember her looking at my knee, my whole leg, just visualizing my whole leg, and being, Petra, something's going on here with your knee. Because they didn't realize at the time that my patella was broken too. I mean, I know, honestly, at that point it didn't even matter because I wasn't standing on it. It was healing, right? They didn't change the course of treatment. But I mean, it did matter. It mattered that she figured out something was wrong. She goes, there's something wrong here. They took me back for another x-ray. That was a big deal. So I got another, an x-ray. I guess they just did an x-ray. I don't remember if they took me back to do a CAT scan. Whatever they did, they found out that I had a broken patella. And it was neat because she was the one that found that. And she said, I knew something was going on. It was neat. And anyway, so they didn't really do much more because I was in traction, and the knee at the same time as my hip was healing was going to heal. It was good to know that it was broken, though. And it was interesting. It was very interesting that she figured that out. But I also my idea of a nurse before my admission when I was 17 to the hospital was that they changed your bed, they cleaned your body, they give you a sponge bath and wiped your butt, helped you walk around the unit. I never realized the knowledge that they had. I never realized the skill set that they had. I never realized all that they knew about a body, a person's body, and the physiological processes of it. I just really associated nursing with genuinely giving a bed bath and keeping the patient clean. Never realized they were an advocate, that they did a physical assessment of the patient every day. All these things were just, I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted so much to be like these strong, I don't think I had a male nurse when I was there, so I'll say these strong women because there wasn't, and men now, there's so many men nurses. But then there weren't any taking care of me, at least for the time that I was there. Oh, there was one guy maybe that came around, but I think he was pulled to the unit. I don't think he worked there every day. Actually, I think it might have been the husband of one of the nurses that was there. Either way, I just was so enthralled with nursing and so excited then to know that I was going to be a nurse. And then I found out that they had nurses that got their bachelor's degree. I guess I didn't even realize that nurses went to college to be a nurse. I thought they went to like a technical program for a short time, which I know that maybe they did. LPNs do. The licensed practical nurses is a different type of schooling. But at the time, I didn't even realize that you could go and get a 4-year degree to be a nurse, and I learned all that while I was in the hospital and changed my course. I was going to be a nurse, and wow, that's being a nurse is just what I am. That's what I am, and I've been a nurse for a long time and done all kinds of different jobs with nursing. And here's my nursing spiel. If you're young and you're not sure what you want to do, a nurse, you can work anywhere. You can work in the ER, you can work in the ICU, you can work in the OR, you can do med surg, you can work in pediatrics. You can be an administrator. You can totally be behind a desk pushing papers. You can be a leader. You can lead, you can support. You can do so many things as a nurse, and I have been blessed as a nurse to do exactly that, to work as a sedation nurse, to work med surg. I didn't really ever work in peds after that. I thought I wanted to be a pediatric nurse. I used to get pulled to pediatrics, and I was like, nope, not for me, not for me. It wasn't the kids, it was the parents. I had a hard time dealing with if I didn't like the parents or I thought they weren't treating their child well. It was really hard for me to watch that, and hence why I make a better nurse than I would have a social worker. It's really good I didn't become a social worker, because I can tell you I would have taken that job home with me and just tossed and turned in bed at night if I was a social worker. And even as a nurse, sometimes you take the job home with you, especially when you're a med surg nurse and you're taking care of patients for days on end. You get so into that patient, and if you don't feel like things are going right for that patient or the way you want them to go, I would take the job home with me and think about it. But then I got into different types of nursing and could separate myself more from the job and just do the job and come home and live my life and not think about it as much. But when I was on med surg, it was harder for me to separate my work life from my home life. But then when I got into like procedure nursing, I could come home, and I got into surgical nursing, I could come home and not worry as much. And then I got into leadership, well, guess what? I took that home with me every day. I was a 24/7 leader, and wanted, even when I was at home, was still talking about work with, I just was too much into that. I had to also figure out how to manage leadership in nursing. But I really did take a little bit of a sidebar there in the conversation, which is okay, I think. The physical trauma part, the part that was interesting was comforting other people too. So you go through this trauma, and it's interesting. I don't ever remember anybody saying, maybe you need, back then in these days, this is the 80s. I don't remember anybody saying, oh, maybe you need therapy, Petra, from all this trauma you've been through. That didn't happen. Excuse me. That didn't happen back then. I can tell you that. No, we didn't get therapy. No, not the 80s kids. Sorry, it's just kind of funny. I think about, I'm a Gen Xer, and I do think about the different ways that kids are raised according to what decade they grew up in. And yeah, therapy wasn't even in the question, but I remember there was one nurse that did come in, and every nurse had their different strengths. Like I said, that one nurse, her strong point was the physical assessment. She was really good at that. But this other nurse, her name was C. Actually, I ended up working with this nurse later when I went back to be a nurse, which is really cool. Anyway, at the time, she was the one nurse that came in and did ask. I feel like she was more like a psych person, because she would be like, how are you? You know, like that kind of person, like those open-ended questions. You're like sitting there like, okay. I actually think this nurse genuinely cared about me, and that's why she was asking the questions. I don't think she had an ulterior motive to be like some psychological support to me, although she was just a kind, beautiful, she still is. I don't even know where she is now because I moved out of that state, but she was just so kind. And I think if anybody talked to me where I felt like I was being supported emotionally while I was there, it was her. And then I read a lot. I read a lot of magazines and stories and books, and I feel like that was maybe more of my emotional support. I wrote a lot in journals about my feelings. I had a lot of, like I said, I had a lot of friends who would bring a movie over, maybe a bag of popcorn, maybe a bag of chips or food, or just visit me, fill me in on what was going on. I do remember the first day or two after the accident, they didn't wash my hair yet. And you figure I had this fresh, sewn up forehead that was nasty looking with dirty, bloody hair. And I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't look in the mirror for 3 days. I remember I didn't want to see my face. I didn't want to see the scar. I didn't want to see the big forehead incision or scar, or not scar, wound. It was a wound at the time that was sewn up. I didn't want to see it. Didn't even want to see myself at all. And someone told me the first day my face was real swollen. It looked like my eyeball was popping out. They said the first couple days that I was there, my face was really swollen. And that, I didn't see that. I didn't look at myself. That was probably another reason I didn't look at myself. When someone told me my eyeball looked like it was popping out of my head, that freaked them out. I was like, nope, I don't need to see that. So I remember I hadn't even looked in the mirror, and the team, the winter track team, my friend H and a couple of the other girls drove to the hospital to visit me. And I think it was maybe 4 or 5 of them all walk in at once to visit me. I'm surprised they let them all in, but there was a whole slew of them. And I was so excited. I was like, yay, my team's here. And I was so happy, and I was like smiling real big. And they all walk in, and I'm like so excited to see them because I just really wanted to see them. They looked at me and they looked like they were going to cry. It was like they saw a monster. And I remember seeing their face expressions when they walked into the room and comforting them, like being like, no, it's okay. I don't have any pain. Like, I'll be fine. Like, this is all right. I'm going to heal. Like the doctor said, I can heal 100%, you know, like everything's going to be fine. Meanwhile, they're probably looking at this big wound in my forehead and thinking, no, it's not. Like, it was just kind of like their face expressions. I'll never forget that either. I can still see that. I can see these 4 young women walking into my room with the look of horror. It did take me a long time to heal. I had to be on crutches, and that year I was a bus girl at a really nice restaurant in Cape May, and I remember they told me I couldn't lift more than 30 pounds. So I ended up getting a job in Wildwood at this outside. I went from working in a gourmet restaurant that I loved. I felt like such a waitress snob now. You're going to hear my snobbiness. But I was like working at a restaurant called Maureen up in Cape May, and we would wear little bow ties and our little tuxedo suits, and we really waited on some famous people. I remember these are the famous people I waited on, which some of you might not even recognize these names, but Pat Shiraki came in. She was a news person. Brooke Shields came in. Chef Tell came in. I don't know if you know Chef Tell. I loved Chef Tell. I used to watch him cook when Chef Tell had a TV show. Anyway, so these are all the famous people that came in when I was a busgirl there. But then I went from doing that to I had to serve paper plate, a place that served paper plates. So I ended up being working at this place in which another friend of mine got me the job, so I'm so thankful because her whole family worked there. And I was really thankful for the job, but I worked on the porch. I got the job that was like the summertime girl job that they just had the transient waitress work. Transient, that sounds funny. I felt like all the old-time waitresses that had been there every summer had the inside, and the new person worked the outside. So I worked the porch because I was the new girl. And it was just all these kids and families would come down, and like actually the nice thing about working there was a lot of people from New York would come to it was in Wildwood Crest. So a lot of people would come from New York, and they would tip me huge tips. I was like, yes, New York people, even though you wear your socks to your knees and you look like such a goofball on the beach, because they would always wear their sneakers on the beach. But they tipped really well, really well. And I can't say I had fun that summer waitressing there. I had fun talking to the families that would come down, and sometimes a family would stay for a week, so you'd get to know the whole New York family. And I want to say New York, I felt like they were all from New York, everybody there. I mean, there were some people that weren't. Maybe it's just that the people that came from New York, you don't forget them, because they all are like, yo, and they yell at each other, and they all come down like 5 at a time, take over a whole 20 people table. They all wake up slow and eat a lot of food, but tip really well. So maybe it just seemed like it was all New York people because they were the people that were the loudest. People from New York. Okay, how do you say things politically correct? I'm trying to learn to not offend anybody. People who live in New York. Anyway, so what else I was going to say about that job that was good was I rode my bike to that job every day, and it was a long bike ride to Wildwood Crest. It was longer than Cape May. So I got in really good shape again quickly. I went from being flat. I went from having these big, beautiful, bulging leg muscles to watching in a 2-week time. And this is where I've learned you can lose your muscle tone in 2 weeks. So, sidebar, but this is really good information. If you have an older person who gets sick and they're laying in bed a lot, get them up, walk them around. Don't let them just lay there. Because I was 17 years old, and I watched my big muscles, and I had big muscles. I have real big, even my legs are big. I have big legs. Even when I'm not in shape, my legs are just big. And I had big muscles, and I remember watching the muscles go away in 2 weeks. And because my leg was like stretched out, I could see the skin, I could see the bone with the skin just hanging with no muscles. You want to talk about watching something happen, your body morph and change. In just 2 weeks, I lost my muscle tone. I can't even describe how fast you can lose muscle. And I really think that is so crucial with these old people. I shouldn't say with these old people, that doesn't sound nice. With people who are older, who maybe like get pneumonia and they start laying around a lot, you really need to get people up and make them walk or exercise them, because you lose it quick. You lose it really quick. PT in the hospital is so crucial. PT, physical therapy is just so important. Walking is just so important. Movement is like so important. So anyway, what I was talking about was the healing process was long for me. Like I said, traction was long. It felt like forever. They put me in traction at home. That I had to be tutored to get through school. Then I was in crutches. Then, because I didn't have a car anymore, I couldn't afford a car. I wasn't about to spend any of my saved money on another car because I needed to save money for college. College was my main focus at that point. So my money was going to stay in my shoebox for college. Wasn't going to be spent on a car. So I rode bikes everywhere. I rode my bike to that Wildwood Crest job in the summer. And then senior year, I started running cross country again right away. And the doctor told me not to run at that time. Wasn't supposed to start running yet, but I did. I ran cross country. And when I ran cross country, I ended up getting stress fractures and this is when I was mad. So all this time, I'm like, la-di-da, I had this major traumatic injury, la-di-da, I'll be fine. Felt this amazing positive attitude. I was 17, things change in time. I don't know what I would have felt when I was 20 or 30 and going through this. But at this age, I was like, I'm going to heal. I was cocky, I'm going to be better. I'm going to be 100%. Yeah, me. I'm not going to suffer from this. Well, when I started cross country, I remember being frustrated because I was a little out of shape, but I got in shape really quickly. But because I learned when I went back to the doctor with these stress fractures, I was starting to do really well again in cross country, and I was starting to get really fast. And then I got these stress fractures, and it hurt. They hurt so bad. Stress fractures hurt. It's a broken bone, really, a little fracture in your bone. It hurt. And I was like, I was so mad then. I was like, no, I am not supposed to get stress fractures. And I was pissed. I was angry. And I kept running. I ran on the stress fractures. They healed. I didn't run as well as I think I would have. But by winter track, I was 100%. And by spring track, I was 100%. I ran that year, my senior year. I ran hard and fast, and I loved it. I ran the mile, the 2 mile, and then I even did the 800 for a little bit. It was another girl's run, but I did it she was out very short time. She was a really good runner too. I did there were a couple track meets. I did the 800, the 1 mile, and the 2 mile competition. That's a lot to do hard and fast. And I loved it. It was like thrilling for me. I hated the hardest run I've ever done in my whole life is 800, because the 800, and I also did the relay. I did the 1 mile, the 2 mile, the 800 relay, and I usually did the 16, I guess, yeah, at the end of the relay there's a mile, right? I'm forgetting. I did the mile at the end of the relay too. Oh my gosh. Anyway, ran a lot. And then I remember, though, this is kind of a little notch on my belt, and I'm going to brag a little bit, because I'm going to brag, but I didn't know this at the time. So honestly, 10 years later, I'm 18, I'm 28 years old, and I'm a nurse. I'm working in the surgical unit in Cape May County at Burdett Tomlin. And I'm working with a bunch of nurses. And I remember one day I'm doing post-recovery with another nurse. We're working together. And I loved this nurse. She had such a positive attitude. And she had teenage daughters. And she comes up to me. She goes, guess what? And I'm like, what? She's like, my daughter beat your record. The 2 mile. I guess I had the 2 mile record for 10 years. I had the record at the school for the fastest 2 mile. And I didn't even know I had it. I didn't even know. She said that her daughter had been trying to beat Petra Demieux's record. That was her whole goal, was to beat my record. And she beat it. And I was like, what? I said, I didn't even know I had it. It's so funny. I remember, then I think I was like all cocky and proud of myself. Like, yeah, I had this record for this time that I didn't even know I had. I thought that was kind of funny. But anyway, so trauma is, at that time, I can tell you, being 17, I had this attitude that never felt like, even when I didn't know how I was going to heal, I still felt like I'm going to be better than this. This situation is temporary. I'm going to heal. I didn't woe is me. I didn't think what if. Don't ever remember thinking, what if I can't run again? What if this can't happen again? What if? I don't ever remember that statement, what if, being in my mindset then. I just remember thinking, I'm kicking this is an injury, I'm going to heal, and that's what I'm going to do. I remember the most anger or frustration I felt of all things wasn't after the car accident, wasn't being afraid of how I was going to manage it, wasn't being afraid of not healing properly. It was more when I got the stress fractures from not healing fast enough. That's when I got angry. That's when I was mad. I was good. I was good till that. My attitude was, again, I was 17, but that trauma changed my life in a way. As I said, choosing nursing career. Nursing is me. Nursing is what I am. I'm a nurse, and I love it. And I wasn't even ever thinking about that to go to college to do that ever at that time. And I'm so thankful I did. My garage band told me my song is too long, so I have to end this podcast here. I have the whole other story, and I'm excited to share it with you. But what I'm going to do is that will be next Wednesday's podcast. It's a really graphic, exciting story. So next Wednesday, again, is going to be kind of an exciting one. I can't wait for you to hear it. But what I want to share is my stand up and redo. So I have gained the knowledge from trauma, physical trauma, is when it happens, I will not say what if. I will not say what if. I will say when and I will. What if will not be my vocabulary. And if you hear me say it, shake your finger at me and say, don't say that. I've learned words to choose are I will, or today this will happen, not what if. So there you go. That's my stand up and redo. Thanks for spending this time with me. It was a long time, I know. Hi, I'd like to give credit to Sarah Gephardt for the cover page of this podcast. This podcast is a work based on the personal experiences, reflections, and memories of the speaker. The events described are true to the best of the speaker's knowledge and recollection. Some names, locations, identifying characteristics, and timelines have been changed or altered to protect the privacy of the individuals involved. In some cases, composite characters have been created or dialogue has been reconstructed based on memory. The intention of this podcast is not to defame, malign, or harm any individual or entity. Rather, it is to share the speaker's journey with honesty, vulnerability, and integrity. Any opinions expressed are solely those of the speaker and are not intended as statements of fact regarding any person, group, or organization. Listeners should keep in mind that human memory is inherently subjective and selective, and while every effort has been made to ensure accuracy, this podcast reflects the speaker's perspective and truth. Thank you. other person, but he